They thought Earth's flagship was destroyed. It was just warming up. The primary reactor breach alarm screamed through the bridge of the UENS Indomitable as Captain Sarah Chen gripped her command chair's armrests hard enough to leave impressions in the polymer. Another plasma lance tore through the flagship's starboard quarter, and the entire vessel shuddered like a dying animal. The tactical display showed 16 critical hull breaches, both fusion cores fluctuating into the red, and the shield generators offline across 70% of the ship's surface. "All hands, this is the captain," Sarah said, forcing her voice steady even as smoke began curling from an overhead conduit. "Initiate Protocol Ember. I repeat, Protocol Ember is now active." Her Commander Marcus Webb turned from the engineering console with blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "Captain, Ember will take everything offline. We'll be a floating coffin for at least 3 minutes. They'll finish us. They already think they have." Sarah watched the Kaldrex formation wheeling around for another strike, their crystalline warships glittering like lethal jewels against the black. "Comms, send the mayday. Make it convincing." The communications officer, a young woman named Gyro who couldn't be more than 25, worked her console with steady hands despite the chaos. "Mayday signal transmitting. Adding emergency telemetry showing reactor cascade. They'll read it as imminent core breach." Through the main view screen, Sarah watched the lead Kaldrex dreadnought, a massive thing that looked like it had been grown rather than built. All organic curves and pulsing, bioluminescent veins drift closer. Its weapons ports glowed with building energy. The Kaldrex had been so confident. They'd spent 3 months demanding humanity surrender its outer colonies, citing some ancient treaty that gave them dominion over this entire sector. When Earth refused, they'd sent their grand fleet. Earth had sent the Indomitable and her battle group. Now the battle group was debris, and the Indomitable was about to join them. At least, that's what every sensor reading said. That's what the Kaldrex believed. That's what Sarah needed them to believe. "Ember initialization in 30 seconds, Webb reported. He met her eyes, and Sarah saw the same desperate determination she felt burning in her own chest. They'd served together for 8 years, survived the Proxima incursion and the border wars. He trusted her. They all did. God, she hoped she deserved it. The ship groaned, a deep metallic sound that resonated through the deck plating. Lieutenant Kowalski at the helm looked back, his dark skin ashen. "Captain, structural integrity at 18%. If we lose power to the inertial dampeners, we're dead anyway if we don't try this," Sarah said. She pulled up the ship's schematic on her chair's display, watching the cascade of red warnings spread like infection through the Indomitable's systems. 2,300 crew aboard, 2,300 lives, betting everything on an emergency protocol that had never been tested in actual combat. The simulations had been promising, but simulations didn't account for the absolute terror of going dark in the middle of a battle. 10 seconds, Webb counted. "All decks report ready. Engineering confirms all non-essential systems prepared for emergency shutdown. Gravity's going to cut," Sarah warned the bridge crew. "Secure yourselves." She barely had time to activate her chair's restraints before the Indomitable died. Every light winked out simultaneously. The background hum of life support, so constant it usually went unnoticed, vanished into silence. The tactical displays went black. The view screen became just a sheet of transparent aluminum showing the stars and the Kaldrex fleet in terrible clarity. And then gravity released its hold, and Sarah felt her stomach drop as she became weightless in her harness. For a moment, one endless, terrifying moment, there was nothing but silence and darkness and the fear that maybe this time she'd miscalculated. Then the emergency lighting flickered on, bathing the bridge in deep red. "Ember active," Webb said, his voice tight. "All systems offline except essential life support. We're running on emergency batteries. Clock's ticking, Captain. 3 minutes until we can attempt restart." Through the view screen, Sarah watched the Kaldrex dreadnought slide closer, its crystalline hull catching the light of the distant star. She could see smaller craft launching from its bays, boarding ships, or maybe just scouts to confirm the kill. The aliens moved with the unhurried confidence of predators approaching dead prey. "Gyro, are they buying it?" Sarah asked. The communications officer had her eyes closed, one hand pressed to her neural interface port. Without main power, she was running her console through a direct brain link to the emergency systems. "Yes, ma'am. I'm intercepting their communications. They're celebrating. The fleet commander is informing their conclave that Earth's flagship has been destroyed. They're saying," she paused, and Sarah saw her jaw tighten. "They're saying humanity has learned its place in the galaxy." 2 minutes 30, Webb announced. Sarah's fingers drummed against her armrest. This was a gamble. Protocol Ember was predicated on one simple truth that human engineers had discovered early in their experiments with quantum fusion: the cause didn't like being shut down suddenly. They especially didn't like being shut down when they were damaged and destabilized. Given the right conditions, the right sequence of magnetic containment failures and plasma routing, you could turn a dying fusion reactor into something that very much wanted to live again. You just had to convince everyone it was dead first. "Captain," Kowalski said, pointing at the view screen, "they're launching recovery ships. Looks like they want to study the wreckage." "Of course they do." Sarah felt a grim smile pull at her lips. "Humans are still a novelty in their galaxy. They want to know what makes us tick." "They're about to find out," Webb muttered. 2 minutes. The bridge had gone quiet except for the occasional creak of stressed metal and the rasp of breathing. Sarah could smell ozone from blown circuits and something acrid that might have been melting insulation. The temperature was already dropping, the emergency systems unable to maintain climate control. She could see her breath misting in the red light. She thought about the Kaldrex, about the recordings they'd studied of the aliens. They were a crystalline species, their bodies formed from some kind of living mineral lattice. They moved slowly, thought slowly, lived for centuries. They'd built an empire that spanned 1,200 worlds over the course of millennia. They valued patience, tradition, and the natural order of things. They could not comprehend a species that had done from first flight to faster-than-light travel in less than a century. To them, humanity was chaos incarnate, dangerous children playing with weapons they didn't understand. The Kaldrex had decided to teach those children a lesson. 1 minute 30. A Kaldrex recovery ship smaller than their dreadnought, but still twice the size of a human destroyer, approached the Indomitable's starboard side. Sarah could see it through the view screen, its surface rippling with bioluminescence. The aliens aboard probably thought they were being cautious, approaching a potentially unstable wreck. They had no idea. "Ma'am," Gyro said, her voice barely a whisper, "they're scanning us. Deep scan. They'll see the cores are still intact, just dormant." "Not if we're lucky," Sarah replied. "Damaged fusion cores give off the same quantum signature whether they're building to breach or building to restart. They won't know the difference until it's too late." 1 minute. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. This was the moment that would either save humanity's foothold in this sector or doom the Indomitable and everyone aboard to become a footnote in the Kaldrex's history files. 30 seconds, Webb said. "Engineering reports the cores are holding pattern. Plasma flow is stable. Containment fields are, Captain. They're rebuilding faster than projected." That's the damage, Sarah said. The microfractures in the magnetic containment grid are creating feedback loops. It's accelerating the restart sequence. That could also make them explode. Yes, 15 seconds. The Kaldrex recovery ship extended a docking tube toward the Indomitable's hull. Sarah watched it snake closer, a crystalline umbilical that would latch onto her ship and inject boarding teams. The aliens would expect to find corpses floating in darkened corridors. Instead, they'd find 2,300 very pissed-off humans waiting in the shadows. 10 seconds. 9, 8. Sarah gripped her armrests again, this time in anticipation rather than fear. All hands, prepare for restart. Set condition 1 throughout the ship. Weapons free on my mark. 5, 4, 3. The Kaldrex docking tube made contact with a hull through the ship's skeleton. Sarah felt the vibration as their magnetic clamps engaged. 2, 1. Restart now. The Indomitable roared back to life. Light flooded the bridge as every system came online simultaneously. The fusion cores, dormant for 3 minutes but building pressure the entire time, ignited with twice their normal output. Power surged through conduits that had been cold and dead, and suddenly the flagship that had been a floating corpse became a predator baring its teeth. Gravity restored, Kowalski reported as weight returned with a stomach-lurching lurch. Inertial dampeners online. Shields rebuilding. Weapons hot, called Lieutenant Morrison from Tactical, her voice carrying a savage satisfaction. All batteries locked and tracking. Torpedo tubes loaded. Shipwide systems at 95% and climbing, Webb said, disbelief and pride warring in his tone. Captain, we did it. Ember actually worked. Through the view screen, Sarah watched the Kaldrex recovery ship begin to pull away, its movements suddenly frantic. The dreadnoughts' weapons ports flared to life, but they'd expected the Indomitable to be dead. They were out of formation, scattered, confident. They'd made the mistake of thinking the fight was over. Humans didn't give up. The Kaldrex were about to learn that lesson the hard way. Target the recovery ship, Sarah ordered. Torpedoes and main batteries. Fire. The Indomitable spoke, and the void listened. Twin antimatter torpedoes streaked from the flagship's tubes, trailing blue fire. They covered the distance to the recovery ship in 2 seconds and detonated against its hull in a flash that left afterimages burning in Sarah's vision. The alien vessel's crystalline structure shattered, fragments tumbling away into the black. The main batteries followed up with coherent light beams that turned debris into vapor. Target destroyed, Morrison reported. Engaging secondary targets. The Kaldrex fleet scrambled to respond, but they moved with that characteristic slowness, their crystalline bodies unable to react as quickly as human neurology. By the time the dreadnoughts' weapons swung toward the Indomitable, the flagship was already moving, her newly restored engines pushing her into an attack vector that brought her across the enemy's vulnerable aft quarter. Give them a broadside, Sarah commanded. Let them see what humanity builds when we're angry. The Indomitable unleashed hell. Plasma cannons, rail guns, laser arrays, and torpedo launchers fired in a synchronized barrage that had taken human weapons designers decades to perfect. Each system complemented the others, creating overlapping fields of fire that left no escape. The dreadnoughts' shields held for perhaps 3 seconds before collapsing under the onslaught. Their flagship's engines are offline, Morrison shouted over the thunder of the guns. Multiple hull breaches. They're venting atmosphere. Cease fire, Sarah ordered. The guns fell silent, though the Indomitable kept moving, circling the wounded dreadnought like a shark. Gyro, open a channel to the Kaldrex fleet commander. Channel open, ma'am. Sarah took a breath, composing her thoughts. The next few moments would determine whether this battle ended in mutual slaughter or something else. Kaldrex Fleet Commander. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Naval Ship Indomitable. Your flagship is disabled. Your recovery ship is destroyed. You came to this system to teach humanity a lesson about our place in the galaxy. She paused, letting the silence stretch. I think we just taught you one instead. The response came after a long moment, the translator struggling with the subsonic harmonics of Kaldrex's speech. Captain Chen. The voice sounded like crystals grinding together. We were certain your vessel had been destroyed. How did you survive? We didn't survive, Sarah said, allowing herself a small smile. We just refused to die. There's a difference. Another pause. Sarah could imagine the confusion rippling through the Kaldrex command structure. They were a species that valued certainty, that moved with deliberate calculation. The idea that an enemy could feign death, could use their own injuries as a weapon, was probably alien to their entire strategic doctrine. This is not how war is conducted, the Kaldrex commander said finally. It is deceitful. It's called survival. Sarah's voice hardened. You attacked our colonies. You demanded we bow to your ancient claims and your galactic order. You came here expecting to crush a young species that didn't know its place. Instead, you found out that humans don't have a place in your order. We make our own. Your vessel is damaged, the alien said, a note of desperation entering its grinding voice. Our fleet still numbers 12 warships to your 1. You cannot prevail. Can't I? Sarah pulled up the tactical display, showing the Kaldrex formation. They were scattered, demoralized, their flagship crippled. Your ships are designed for slow, methodical warfare. Ours are designed for speed and violence. Your crews have been trained to fight enemies that think like you do, patient, calculating, following established protocols. You have no idea how to fight an enemy that won't die when it's supposed to. She leaned forward in her chair, eyes hard. But here's the thing, I don't want to destroy your fleet. I don't want to send 12 ships full of people back to your conclave as wreckage. Humans fight hard, but we don't fight for the joy of killing. We fight to protect what's ours and to earn the respect we're due. Respect, the Kaldrex commander repeated, the translator making it sound like a question. Respect, Sarah confirmed. Stand down. Withdraw from our space. Tell your conclave that humanity will not be bullied or conquered, but will happily trade, negotiate, and coexist. We're new to your galaxy, but we're not children. We're not chaos. We're just human. That means we'll surprise you. We'll refuse to follow your rules. We'll do things you think are impossible. But it also means we'll keep our word, honor our treaties, and fight like hell to protect our friends. The bridge had gone silent, every crew member listening to their captain negotiate the future of human-Kaldrex relations while floating in a damaged warship surrounded by a superior enemy force. Sarah could feel their eyes on her, could feel the weight of their trust. You could have destroyed us when we approached to board your vessel, the Kaldrex commander said slowly. Why did you not? Because I wanted you to understand, Sarah replied. Destroying your recovery ship was necessary to make a point. Slaughtering your crews when you're no longer a threat. That's not who we are. Humans are dangerous when cornered, yes. But we're also capable of mercy. Remember that when you file your report. The channel went quiet for so long that Gyro checked her console twice to make sure they were still connected. Finally, the Kaldrex commander spoke again. Your terms are acceptable, Captain Chen. We will withdraw, but understand that the conclave will hear of this. They will debate. They will question. Let them, Sarah said. And when they're done debating, tell them Earth is ready to talk, not as subjects to masters, but as equals. She nodded to Gyro, who cut the connection. The tactical display showed the Kaldrex fleet beginning to withdraw, their formation ragged, their ships moving with none of the precision they'd shown when arriving. The crippled dreadnought limped along, supported by two smaller vessels, leaving a trail of crystalline fragments in its wake. "All stop," Sarah ordered. "Stand down from battle stations. Secure the ship and get damage control teams to work. I want a full status report in 30 minutes." The bridge crew moved with a practiced efficiency of veterans, but Sarah could see the relief in their movements, hear it in their voices. They'd survived. Against all odds, with their backs to the wall, they'd survived and won. Webb unbuckled from his station and moved to stand beside Sarah's chair, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "That was one hell of a gamble, Captain." "It was the only gamble we had," Sarah replied quietly. She pulled up the casualty reports, feeling her chest tighten as the numbers populated. 47 dead, 112 wounded. She'd known there would be losses. War always demanded payment, but seeing the names, reading the brief casualty descriptions, made it real in a way that abstract numbers never could. "We need to start repairs," she continued, pushing down the grief to be dealt with later. "And we need to send a message back to Earth Command. They need to know the Kaldrex are withdrawing." "Already drafted it," Webb said, showing her his console. "Thought you might want to review before sending." Sarah read through the report, making minor adjustments. It was straightforward and professional, laying out the engagement, the activation of Protocol Ember, and the subsequent victory. She added a paragraph about the fallen, making sure their sacrifice was noted in the official record, then authorized transmission. "Message away," Gyro reported. "Command should receive it in about 6 hours. "Good." Sarah unbuckled her restraints and stood, feeling every bruise and pulled muscle from being thrown around the bridge during the battle. "Webb, you have the con. I'm going to walk the ship, check on the crew." "Captain, you should rest." "I will," Sarah interrupted gently, "after I've seen with my own eyes that my ship and my people are okay. Hold position here. If the Kaldrex try anything, wake me up." She left the bridge and made her way through the Indomitable's corridors, past damage control teams cutting away twisted bulkheads and engineering crews patching power conduits. Every person she passed straightened when they saw her, pride evident in their bearing despite their exhaustion. Sarah stopped to speak with as many as she could, learning names, hearing quick summaries of the repairs, offering encouragement where it was needed. In engineering, she found Chief Ramos overseeing the reactor teams. The woman looked like she'd aged a decade in the last hour, her gray hair escaping from its usual tight bun, her uniform scorched and torn. "Captain," Ramos said, wiping sweat from her forehead, "the cars are stable. Ember protocol worked better than we could have hoped. The feedback loops actually strengthened the magnetic containment grids during the restart. It's like the damage healed itself." "Human engineering at its finest," Sarah said. "Any idea how long until we're at full operational capacity?" 72 hours, assuming no new emergencies. "We'll need to fabricate some replacement parts, but the foundries are intact." Ramos hesitated, then added, "Captain, when you gave the order to go dark, I've been in the Navy for 28 years, and I've never been more terrified in my life. And more proud." Sarah clasped the older woman's shoulder. "We're all still here because you and your team made that reactor restart happen exactly when we needed it. The Indomitable lives up to her name because of people like you." In medical, she found Dr. Conqua coordinating triage, his surgical scrubs spattered with blood. The casualties were laid out in rows, the dead carefully covered with sheets while the wounded received treatment. Sarah moved through the bay, stopping at each bed to speak with those who were conscious. Some were too injured to do more than nod, but others managed weak smiles or even jokes. A young ensign named Park, his leg encased in a medical brace, grabbed her hand as she passed. "We got them, didn't we, Captain? They thought they killed us, but we came back." "We did," Sarah confirmed. "Rest now. We'll need you back on duty soon." "Yes, ma'am." Park's eyes were already drooping closed, the pain medication pulling him under. "Doctor," Conquo pulled Sarah aside as she was leaving. 47 dead, he said quietly. "Could have been a lot worse. Should have been a lot worse, given the damage we took." "It's 47 too many," Sarah replied. "Yes." The doctor's dark eyes were sad. "But they didn't die for nothing. You gave them a chance. You gave all of us a chance. That matters." Sarah continued her rounds for another 2 hours, visiting every deck, every section, seeing first and the controlled chaos of a wounded warship pulling itself back together. By the time she returned to her quarters, she was barely standing, running on nothing but adrenaline and determination. The moment the door closed behind her, she allowed herself to collapse onto her bunk. The adrenaline drained away, leaving behind exhaustion and the full weight of what they'd just experienced. She thought about the 47 names on the casualty list, about the terrifying minutes when the Indomitable had been dark and dead, about the gamble that had paid off but could just as easily have killed them all. She thought about the Kaldrex commander's confusion at the concept of playing dead, at using deception in warfare. The aliens fought according to rigid codes developed over millennia. They couldn't conceive of an enemy that would break those unspoken rules, that would use their own injuries as a weapon. But that was humanity, wasn't it? They were unpredictable, creative, stubborn beyond all reason. When every census said they were dead, they found a way to live. When every tactical analysis said they should surrender, they found a way to win. Not through superior strength or ancient technology, but through sheer bloody-minded determination and a willingness to try things that others would consider impossible. Sarah's communicator chimed. "Captain, this is the bridge," Webb's voice said. "You asked for a full status report. We're ready when you are." She sat up, pushing the exhaustion aside. "On my way." The next days passed in a blur of repairs, reports, and preparing for whatever came next. The Indomitable couldn't jump to FTL with her current damage, so they held position in the system, working around the clock to restore the ship's capabilities. Supply vessels from the nearest human outpost arrived on the second day, bringing replacement parts, fresh food, and news from home. Earth Command's response to Sarah's report was brief but pointed. "Well done. Hold position. Reinforcements inbound. Diplomatic mission being prepared." That was the part that made Sarah smile. Not more warships, though those were coming too, but a diplomatic mission. Humanity had learned the lesson that so many warrior species seemed to miss. Winning the battle was only the beginning. What came next, how you treated your defeated enemy, how you built the peace that determined whether you'd just won a battle or secured a future. On the 5th day after the battle, a Kaldrex courier ship arrived under flag of truce. Sarah met with their representative in the Indomitable's briefing room, the alien's crystalline body refracting the overhead lights into rainbow patterns on the walls. "I am Subharmonist Keyleth," the Kaldrex introduced itself, its voice emerging from a translator box mounted on its thorax. "I speak for the local conclave delegation. We have been discussing your actions during the recent engagement." "And what have you concluded?" Sarah asked, keeping her tone neutral. "That humanity is more dangerous than we estimated," Keyleth said bluntly. "Your tactical deception, your unwillingness to accept defeat, your rapid adaptation to combat conditions, these are concerning traits. The Conclave debates whether humanity should be allowed to remain in this sector." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. "Subharmonist Keyleth, with respect, we didn't ask the Conclave's permission to be here. We're not going anywhere. I know. The alien shifted, a movement that created a sound like wind chimes. That is part of what we are discussing. For 3,000 years, the Kaldrex have maintained order in this region of space. We have established protocols, rules of engagement, codes of conduct. We assumed any new species would learn these rules and adapt to our order. But we're not adapting the way you expected, Sarah finished. No, Keyleth's translated voice carried something that might have been amusement. You are doing what humans apparently always do. You are adapting the rules to suit yourselves. It is unsettling, but also the alien paused, as if searching for words. Also perhaps necessary. Sarah leaned forward. Subharmonist, in the 400 years since humanity developed FEL, we've encountered 17 different spacefaring species. Some were friendly, some were not. We've fought wars and made peace. We've learned that the galaxy is far too complex for any one species' rules to govern everything. The Kaldrex way works for the Kaldrex. The human way works for humanity. Maybe the answer isn't for one of us to adopt the other's methods, but for us to find a new way that works for both. That would require significant discussion, Keyleth said slowly. Then let's discuss. Sarah pulled up a holographic display showing the contested systems. These colonies you demanded we abandon their already home to 3 million humans. We can't just leave them, but I'm sure there are compromises we can reach. Trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, cultural exchanges. The Kaldrex have been in space for millennia. You have knowledge and experience we can learn from. And humanity, well, we have our own things to offer, such as innovation, Sarah said, adaptability, different perspectives on old problems. You said we're unsettling. I prefer to think of it as keeping things interesting. Keyleth made a sound like crystals chiming together, and Sarah realized it was laughing. I begin to understand why the fleet commander chose to withdraw rather than continue fighting. Humans do not think like any species we have encountered. It is disconcerting, but perhaps, as you say, that is valuable. They talked for another hour, sketching out the framework for what would become the first human Kaldrex Accords. It wasn't a full treaty that would take months of negotiation, but it was a start. An agreement to cease hostilities, establish diplomatic channels, and begin the slow process of learning to coexist. When Keyleth's shuttle departed, Sarah stood at the observation window in her quarters and watched it go. The Indomitable was still battered, still bearing the scars of nearly being destroyed, but the ship was alive. Its crew was alive, and humanity had taken another step forward in proving it belonged among the stars. Captain, Webb's voice came over the intercom. Jump engines are back online. Earth Command is asking when we'll be ready to return to port for full repairs. Sarah smiled, her reflection ghosting in the transparent aluminum as she looked out at the stars. Tell them we'll be ready to jump in 12 hours. And Webb, yes, ma'am. Make sure the message includes casualty lists and commendation recommendations. The people who died and the people who fought deserve to have their names in the permanent record. Already done, Captain. I've been working with the department heads. We've got quite a list. Good. Sarah turned away from the window, heading back toward the bridge. There was still work to do, always more work. But that was the nature of command. I'm on my way up. Let's bring the Indomitable home. The bridge crew looked up as she entered, and Sarah felt a surge of pride at what she saw. These people, human people, with all their stubbornness and creativity and refusal to accept defeat, had faced impossible odds and found a way through. They'd turned a dying ship into a weapon, used their own injuries as camouflage, and come back from the edge of destruction to secure not just a military victory but the foundation for lasting peace. That was humanity's real strength, Sarah thought as she settled into her command chair. Not their weapons or their technology, but their absolute refusal to give up combined with their willingness to extend a hand to former enemies. They fought like demons when cornered, but they didn't hold grudges. They adapted, they persevered, and they always found a way forward. All stations report ready for jump, Kowalski reported from the helm. Navigation has the course laid in, added Morrison. Engineering confirms jump engines are stable and fully charged. Ramos's voice came through from below decks. Sarah looked around the bridge, meeting the eyes of each crew member. They were tired, battered, but unbroken. The Indomitable might have appeared dead to the Kaldrex, but she'd just been warming up. Just like her crew, just like humanity itself. "Take us home," Sarah ordered, "and somebody make sure to note in the log that the UENS Indomitable is ready for her next assignment. We've got a galaxy to explore, and I don't think we're done surprising people yet." The ship hummed with built-in power as the jump engines spooled up. Through the view screen, Sarah watched the stars begin to distort as spacetime folded around them. In a few hours, they'd be back in Earth space, back to the shipyards for repairs, back to their families and lives. But they'd also be back to training, planning, and preparing for whatever came next. Because that was the thing about humanity, they never stopped moving forward. They never stopped pushing boundaries, testing limits, finding new ways to solve old problems. The Kaldrex thought Earth's flagship had been destroyed. They'd learn better. They'd learn that you couldn't destroy something that refused to die, couldn't defeat an enemy that turned every setback into an opportunity, couldn't break a species that measured its worth not by the battles it won, but by the peace it built afterward. The Indomitable jumped, and the stars streaked past like silver rain. Behind them, in a system that would soon bear both human and Kaldrex names in the official charts, the first seeds of a new alliance had been planted. It would be a difficult alliance, full of misunderstandings and cultural clashes, but it would grow. Humanity would make sure of that, because in the end, that was what humans did. They survived, they adapted, they built, they reached out across the darkness between stars and said, "We're here, we're not leaving, but we'd rather be friends than enemies." And when necessary, when pushed to the edge, when every census said they were dead and every enemy assumed they were beaten, humans proved one simple truth that echoed through the void: they were just warming up.